Hi, hello, and welcome. Today, I'm going to be unpacking some of the perhaps forgotten aspects of the Twilight franchise, both behind and in front of the scenes. Let's start at the beginning, shall we? It all started on June 3rd, 2003, where Stephenie has gone on the record saying she had a dream in which she was in a third person omniscient view of a young man and a normal girl sitting in a meadow. She said that this young man was powerful and otherworldly and had the desire to kill the young woman despite being in love with her, and that the young lady knew that he had desires to kill her, and yet she was still in love with him.
Started in June of 2003 when I had this really great dream about a vampire and a girl having a conversation in a meadow and couldn't stop thinking about it, so I wrote it down. And really there was no background to my writing. It came out of nowhere.
Stephenie often described Edward in a way that she would describe a living, breathing person, so much so that it was like Edward would dictate the way that she would choose to write Edward.
I've had a lot of other authors tell me that they have voices in their heads too with their characters, and they would just be talking and I wouldn't want to forget what they were saying, so I'd have to get up and write it down.
When asked by fans why Edward himself just couldn't tell Bella in plain English that he was a vampire, she stated that Edward just wouldn't allow her, meaning Stephenie Meyers herself, to write it that way, that that's just something he wouldn't do. And again, it's important to note these are fictional people. You're the author. You can control these characters and tell them what to do and tell them what to say. But it was never like that for her when it came to Edward.
I had this dream that I don't know how much it was a dream and how much I thought about it afterwards because I was kind of out of it, but that Edward actually showed up and told me I got it all wrong. And he existed and everything, but he couldn't live off animals, and he really was, kind of like any other vampire. And I kind of got the sense he was about to kill me. It was really terrifying.
You call it weird, I call it living. Yes, girl slay, girl boss the house down boots. Many Twilight fans, internet sleuths, have been able to deduce that this young man in her dream was most likely Henry Cavill, and the normal young lady was probably her. Let me explain. In the early days of the publication of Twilight, Stephenie Meyer stated on her website that her face cast, or her dream person to play Edward, would be Henry Cavill. Now, Henry Cavill is a household name and very famous at this point, most notable for playing Superman. It is important to note that in 2003, he was relatively unknown. When looking at Cavill's body of work around the time that Stephenie was writing Twilight, he had come out in a movie called The Count of Monte Cristo, a movie that was actually quite popular at the time, despite being heavily panned by critics for not being book accurate. What I theorize happened is that Stephenie went to go and see this movie and saw a young Henry Cavill in a gentleman's uniform and was completely taken aback and smitten. And before we start screaming, "Predator, predator, predator in the dungeon," being that Cavill was 19 and Stephenie was a full-grown married adult with a child, I would say that it's really more likely that Stephenie just recognized that Henry Cavill's beauty is quite literally otherworldly and looks like he was sculpted by the Greek gods themselves. And being that Cavill was 19 at the time, most likely fantasized about what it would have been like to attend a high school with someone who was so otherworldly beautiful like Cavill. And not only fantasize about what it would be like to attend high school with him, but to have him, of all people, be admiring of you.
Stephenie Meyer also describes Bella as looking very similar to herself. She says in a blog post, "In my head, Bella is very fair-skinned, with long, straight, dark brown hair and chocolate brown eyes. Her face is heart-shaped, a wide forehead with a widow's peak, large, wide-spaced eyes, prominent cheekbones, and then a thin nose and a narrow jaw with a pointed chin. Her lips are a little out of proportion, a bit too full for her jawline. She's 5'4" tall and weighs about 115 pounds.
As I mentioned before, I did a lot of research in preparation for making this video, and part of that was watching a lot of Stephenie Meyer interviews. One thing that I found fascinating was Stephenie's description of Edward.
I kind of got the sense he was about to kill me.
And it's important to note that this is coming from a judgment-free zone. As a person who is an aspiring writer and often engages with fantasy and escapism, trust me when I say I'm not judging. And while watching these interviews, I couldn't help but connect the dots between Bella's behavior and the events of New Moon and the way Stephenie describes and talks about Edward.
I don't know how much it was a dream and how much I thought about it afterwards because I was kind of out of it, but Edward actually showed up and told me I got it all wrong. And he exists and everything.
During the events of New Moon, Edward notably breaks up with Bella. Bella has a long period of time where Edward is not in her life, and she experiences a very deep depression. Eventually, Bella experiences apparitions of Edward where she's actually able to see him and hear his voice. She begins to connect the dots that he appears to her in these apparition-like states when she's in states of danger, which causes her to purposely put herself in dangerous situations so that she could be able to see these apparitions. I initially read these books when I was in high school and they were still in the state of being published. I didn't have the advantage of hindsight. None of the movies had been made, and the rest of the series hadn't even been done yet. All I knew was that this series had supernatural elements to it, like vampires and werewolves. And at the time, New Moon is the second book in the series, so I thought perhaps this is a new introduction of a new supernatural element. And I wasn't sure what I was reading at the time. I thought maybe Edward was astral projecting himself to Bella and checking in on her. I don't know. Now, years later, I have realized that what Bella was experiencing was maybe a minor state of psychosis and was very, very, very deeply unwell and very, very depressed. Hashtag Bella for therapy. A popular internet rumor that has been gaining traction as of late is that Twilight first originally started as a Gerard Way My Chemical Romance fan fiction.
When 9/11 happened, there was someone present watching it, witnessed it, and his name was Gerard Way. So it was a guy who was trying to deal with this, going to his therapist, and started creating music and came up with a band called My Chemical Romance. And then there's a girl named Stephenie Meyer who had listened to My Chemical Romance and was inspired by their music and started writing books that went on to become the Twilight series.
And while Stephenie has always been one of the girlies who has loved the emo, moody rock music and has on multiple occasions explained that she was deeply inspired by the music of My Chemical Romance, Muse, Blue October, Evanescence, Linkin Park, so on and so forth. What I believe she means when she says that this music inspired her, I think she means that this music put her in the proper headspace to write a young first love romance, a romance that is all intoxicating, infatuation, can't think of anything else, can't think, sleep, breathe, or think about anything but this person who I'm in love with.
In New Moon, Bella and Edward's passion heats up, and their unlikely love story is inspired by the alternative tunes of Blue October. At this exclusive Breaking Dawn concert, which debuted the special edition of the final book, writer Stephenie Meyer reveals how lyrics from the band's music helped her tell the saga of a vampire and his human obsession.
All of a sudden, I'm hearing these words, and it's like Edward is singing on the radio to me. Hate me today. What is playing in his head as he's walking away from Bella, and all that pain that she doesn't know about.
As Twihards know, Stephenie makes a playlist for each of the books, and she says fans of Jacob and Bella hooking up in the series will love the Blue October track, My Never. It was the driving force behind the words she wrote to express his feelings for her.
I wanna say your name, but the pain starts.
And we could put the 9/11 to My Chemical Romance to Twilight, Pipeline to Rust. Stephenie Meyer was raised in Phoenix, Arizona, and for those who do not know, that is where Bella hails from before she moves to Forks. Stephenie went to college in Brigham University in Utah, which, for those who do not know, is a Mormon college. A lot of ex-Mormons have gone online and have talked about some of the toxic beliefs that are held within the Mormon religion, specifically their stance on darker-skinned people. There's a really great YouTube video by the username Achilles called Twilight, Mormonism, and Feminism, three sides of the same coin. I will leave a link to that video down in the description. She does a really fantastic job of connecting Stephenie's Mormonism to her writing in Twilight. In accordance to the Book of Mormon, it is said that God decided to mark those who were sinners with darker skin and those who are good people with lighter skin.
Those who remained neutral in the battle were cursed to be born with black skin. This is the Mormon explanation for the race. The spirits that fought most valiantly against Lucifer would be born into Mormon families on planet Earth. These would be the lighter-skinned people, or white and delightsome, as the Book of Mormon describes them.
A lot of people have taken this and have connected it to Stephenie Meyer's writing, specifically her unwillingness to write people of color. And for those who might be wondering, wait, aren't there Mexican vampires, Black vampires, and not to mention the indigenous werewolves, aren't those people of color? To the answer of the vampires, the answer is yes, but also no. And as far as the indigenous werewolves go, let's put a pin in that and return to that. For now, let's discuss the vampires of color or lack thereof. Stephenie explains that once a human is bitten and is in the transformation stage of becoming a vampire, all pigment of their skin is lost and they become like white alabaster. So while yes, a person in their human form might be brown Mexican American or Black African American, as soon as they reach the transformation stage, all of the color and pigment of their skin is gone, and making them essentially a white person. Catherine Hardwicke, the director of Twilight, actually made an attempt in making members of the Cullen vampires multiracial, being that they were trying to pass themselves off as adoptees and believing, which I agree with her sentiment, that it would be a lot more believable if they didn't all look the same. Something that Stephenie Meyer vehemently disagreed on and really fought to keep her vampires white. However, Catherine did have a small victory in being able to make and cast multiple secondary characters of color.
In her limited time with the author, however, the director expressed that I wanted a lot more of the cast to be diverse. But Meyer, who was raised Mormon in Phoenix, Arizona, had not really written it that way, Hardwicke says, so she probably just didn't see the world that way. And I was like, oh my god. I want the vampires. I want them all. Alice, I wanted her to be Japanese. I had all these ideas. And she just could not accept the Cullens to be more diverse, because she had really seen them in her mind. She knew who each character was representing in a way, a personal friend or a relative or something. She says Meyer pointed to her book's description of the vampires. She said, I wrote that they had this pale glistening skin. Finally, Meyer came around to the idea of Kenyan-American actor Eddie Gathegi playing Laurent, one of the scary antagonistic vampires, Hardwicke recalls, laughing. The only reason that came through was he was described as having olive skin, and I said, there are black olives out there. Then she was open to the students in Bella's peer group being other ethnicities, so we got Christian Serratos and Justin Chan, so we were able to open it up a little bit.
Now, let's enter the idea of the indigenous werewolves. Her writing about the Quileute tribe is a whole big problem, and maybe too big of a problem for me to properly unpack, but the skinny of it is this. The Quileute tribe is a real tribe from the Pacific Northwest and is not fiction or made up. Stephenie essentially read that the Quileute tribe believes that they are descended of wolves and decided to run with that idea without properly doing research or speaking to any actual indigenous members who are of that Quileute tribe.
There's people out there that didn't even know that the Quileutes even existed. You know, when this Stephenie Meyer wrote that book about Twilight and then the whole series, Eclipse, New Moon, and Breaking Dawn, we start getting tourists, and we're so used to having tourists, and but we start getting younger tourists, and they're like, oh, well, where's Emily's house, and do you know where Jacob's? And I was like, Jacob's house? What do you mean? And you know, my kids were like, oh, Mom, there's a book written about Twilight. And then the elders, they you know, said, hey, Miss Ann, you got to get out there and educate people that we're really not werewolves. You know, we were from the Wolf family and the Wolf clan. It's brought us a lot of national attention, and You know, there's still people that are just so amazed when they come out here to visit us. Wow, they're really here. You know, they're really Quileute people.
She projects a lot of odd and uncomfortable stereotypes about Indigenous people onto her characters. For example, how when Sam was unable to control himself and accidentally physically abused his girlfriend, as well as a lot of the slurs and slanders that the vampires utter about the werewolves, calling them dogs, mongrels, and comparing them to animals.
What is that god-awful wet dog smell? That's probably me. But, Bella, werewolves are not good company to keep.
Speak for yourself.
I can't see past you and your pack of mutts.
Don't get me upset.
Hey, stop.
Things.
Essentially, Stephenie decided to co-opt this tribe and these people without putting proper consideration to who they are as people, as a culture, as a community. Down below, I will be sure to leave a lot of links about donating to the tribe and information about who this tribe is. Moving on to the next major problem that a lot of people have taken issue with, rightly so, with Stephenie, is her decision to make Jasper a Confederate soldier.
Youngest major in the Texas Cavalry. All without having seen any real battle.
Now, again, it's important to note that Stephenie is writing a fictional story. This is in no way based on real people. So her decision to make her character Confederate soldier as opposed to a soldier fighting in the North against slavery was a choice. Or at the very least, she could have made it that Jasper was a Confederate soldier, grew up, learned from his mistakes, and has now decided to make amends for his past and has learned from it. There's a really great video out there on YouTube by Princess Weeks. I will leave the link in the description. And her video is about a long-standing tradition that has become very popular in fictional media about making vampires Confederate soldiers. There are multiple examples of this: True Blood vampires, Vampire Diary vampires, Twilight vampires, Anne Rice vampires. The list goes on. Princess Weeks has surmised that this might be because Anne Rice was the template when it comes to Southern Gothic vampires. She makes a lot of other great points, but I don't know that I 100% agree with the theory that authors are just going in line or trying to maybe closely be inspired or imitate Anne Rice. Stephenie herself had actually mentioned in multiple interviews that she never read Anne Rice, and I tend to believe her.
I don't know how vampires ended up in my life. That was really out of character for me. I never read vampire books. The one genre I didn't touch.
I think what is a lot more likely, and something that falls in line with interviews that she's given in the past, is that she was deeply inspired by Regency era romance books. We could see a lot of shades of Mr. Darcy and Edward, and a lot of the interactions between protagonists and antagonists mirror those of the Regency era romance books. What I think is a lot more likely, in my own personal opinion, that Stephenie was really inspired by these costume dramas, saw the movie Count of Monte Cristo and couldn't shake the idea of Henry Cavill in this uniform, and got swept up in the idea of old school courtship and the gentleman era.
And if I'd met you back then, I would have courted you. Would have taken chaperone strolls and had iced tea on the porch.
And for reasons that I do not quite understand, the idea of the gentleman has been mostly, if not solely, associated with Southern men, i.e. the Southern gentleman. I think when considering what a United States equivalent would be of these lavish costume dramas, we often think about stories like Gone with the Wind. These beautiful, lavish romanticism depictions of courtship, love, costumes, without really giving proper consideration to the insidious nature of these things. It's not like at the Mason-Dixon line, these lavish costumes stopped and this idea of a gentleman stopped. If it existed in the South, I guarantee you it existed in the North, but the North had the advantage of wanting to abolish slavery, so why her character couldn't just be uprooted and rewritten to be of the North is kind of beyond me. An important and interesting aspect of the making of Twilight is the original script that was adapted by MTV Movie Production Company. When Stephenie first wrote Twilight, it was a manuscript that was getting passed around by publishing companies as well as movie production companies. MTV got their hands on it and bought the rights temporarily and hired Mark Lords to quickly put together a script that would be able to be compelling on the big silver screen. A Spotify original podcast called The Big Hit Show was able to get a hold of Mark and interview him about his original script. Pieces of the original MTV script were getting leaked online, and people almost couldn't believe what they were reading and were wondering if there was any truth to this. Turns out it was true. And the reason that it was so unbelievable was because this version of Twilight included jet ski chases, gunfights, and vampire slaying.
Exterior, Cullen Lodge, front yard. Bella tries to make the dash from the lodge across the yard and down towards the boats. Angle on Laurent appearing on the scene. Then Carlisle arrives as well. Carlisle forcefully to Edward. Get her out of here! Carlisle and Esme bravely position themselves between Laurent and his quarry, risking almost certain death. Edward grabs Bella, making a dash for the boat. Laurent battles Esme and Carlisle, easily dominating both. He throws Esme aside like a rag doll and sinks his fangs into Carlisle's throat, viciously killing him. Esme screams. Laurent looks to the beach far below, his eyes narrow. As if looking through a telescope, he can see Edward and Bella climbing into a speedboat. Edward fires up the twin 250s, racing away from the island. Laurent, wanting only Bella, goes after them, leaving Esme kneeling over Carlisle's dead body.
And notably made Bella this powerful female protagonist, which as of late has become a term that makes a lot of women in particular roll their eyes, because what happens with a lot of these movie production companies when they're wanting to make a strong female protagonist, it ends up just being a woman in the place of a man's role. And what made Stephenie Meyer's original manuscript so interesting was that Bella kind of was insignificant and was just a normal girl in a very peculiar and out of this world setting. But nonetheless, Bella was just Bella, and that's what made this story so interesting and so special, was that she was just allowed to be herself, flaws and all. And in preparation for this video, I did do a lot of research, including reading articles and also watching videos of notable YouTubers making essays about the discourse around Twilight. A lot of them I have mentioned within this video, but one of the notable ones was one by Dominic Noble. Dominic put together a Twilight series on his channel where he read every single book within the saga and one by one gave his own review of them. In his initial review, he admitted that he was somebody who hated the series on merit and later was able to come to terms with the fact that as a whole, society tends to be incredibly cruel and judgmental when it comes to media or things that are geared towards young women. So now he said he was coming to this with an open mind and a judgment-free zone. But as I was watching the videos, I kept rolling my eyes and getting annoyed because at the end of the day, he still doesn't get it. I guess I get annoyed because it just seems like he's being so hard-headed about it. And at the end of the day, if this isn't a story aimed for you, then it's not a story aimed for you. It's my deep frustration that I feel for people who, like Mark Lord, the original screenplay writer for MTV, who decided to judge up the Twilight story by including jet skis, gunfights, and vampire slayings, because to him, that's just a better story.
Here's Twilight Saga screenwriter Melissa Rosenberg.
Well, it's interesting that the first writer on it was a man, and it led to jet skis and shotguns in order to deal with the challenge of making Bella proactive. And then when you put women on it, we go in the direction of character. The book is written from a woman's point of view. The adaptation is written from a woman's point of view. The direction of the first movie was directed from a woman's point of view. So it was very much a female gaze from its origin. And if you just simply respect that origin and lean into it, that's what you're going to get on film.
And while it seems like Dominic may or may not be genuinely trying to have an open heart and an open mind, at the end of the day, it's just a story that's not aimed for him, and that's fine. He seems to have a lot of contentious issues and concerns about the toxic dynamic between Edward and Bella. He feels like Edward is just a toxic figure within Bella's life and that their romance is not something aspirational. And while I understand that, and that's very much a valid criticism, I think it's also important to remember that this story became incredibly popular and a multi-million-dollar franchise for a reason. Sometimes fantasy is just about escapism. It's not about being aspirational. Moreover, there's plenty of us who have been able to engage and enjoy the material, such as myself, yet while also being critical of the material, like in this video. And I think to assume that all young people or any person in general who might be watching or consuming the Twilight franchise just won't be able to get that or come to their own conclusions on that is just ridiculous and silly. Stephenie was able to accurately depict the obsession and toxicity of first love, again lending itself to the theory why I believe Stephenie became so popular, because Stephenie didn't write this book thinking it would ever be published or seen by the masses. She wrote it because she became infatuated with the idea of Henry Cavill and had a fever dream about it. And decided that she wanted to write a whole story around that concept. This concept that is incredibly relatable and speaks to anyone who's experienced first love.
And I also thought what was cool that Stephenie had created this feeling of just being madly in love. Like I felt it was just like intoxicating to read the book. Like you felt the first time you fell in love.
So where I personally fall on this, Stephenie is a problematic person, we should all throw tomatoes at her, I don't really know. On the one hand, I completely disavow her ideas and characterization of people of color, while on the other hand, I'm willing to dismiss, if not excuse, her way of writing first love. It's a nuanced issue and certainly something I cannot answer within this video or possibly ever. Maybe the best thing to do is write for yourself, write from the heart, and maybe put some eyes on it of people who you trust and know who can give you practical and good criticism that you could take back and make some changes to your own story. And do your best to educate yourself about the topics and things that you choose to write about. That's my best guess. Another big and noteworthy aspect of the Twilight franchise is that it became a fan fiction that later got created into a movie known as 50 Shades of Grey.
Master of the Universe is a 2009 through 2011 serial Twilight fan fiction written by Erica Mitchell under the pen name Snow Queen's Ice Dragon and collected into 2 volumes. In this alternate universe, Bella Swan is a university student who falls into the orbit of vampy but not actually a vampire billionaire Edward Cullen after interviewing him for the school paper.
There's a couple really great video essays on YouTube, one specifically by Lindsay Ellis called Dear Stephenie Meyer, and another one by Folding Ideas called A Lukewarm Defense of 50 Shades of Grey, where they go into deep detail on how 50 Shades of Grey, being a Twilight fan fiction later produced into its own franchise and movie series, may or may not have changed the way fan fiction is written, the way that it would be viewed moving forward.
Considering just how much E.L. James infringed on Meyer's copyright, outright stole her ideas, imagine if Stephenie Meyer was the vindictive narcissist that the 2009 internet made her out to be, and actually had gone after E.L. James for what basically amounts to copyright infringement. Like, what if she had been like an Anne Rice type, and the whole 50 Shades debacle ended up getting litigated in court? That probably would have ended up with the legality of fanfiction in general getting litigated. And nobody wants that.
If there was anyone who had a leg to stand on and room to bitch about something like this, it was Stephenie Meyer. E.L. James just straight up wrote Twilight fan fiction, completely copying the characteristics of all of Stephenie's original characters down to the setting, the only major changes being vampires to humans, and notably the BDSM of it all. E.L. James financially benefited and was able to create her own original works off of the back of Stephenie Meyer's original characters. And the fact that Stephenie decided to be chill about it is actually a really big thing and probably makes her a better person than me. Now that we are reaching the conclusion of this video, let's do a little bit of a rapid fire of weird, possibly forgotten elements of the story within the Twilight saga. I completely forgot that Jacob in the story has twin sisters. And not only that, within the Black family tree, there are twins in every generation. And I have heard the old wives' tale that twins are genetic and skip a generation and continue. Whether that's an old wives' tale or not, I do not know, but I think it's interesting and maybe kind of weird for Stephenie to do that. Speaking of Mr. Jacob Black, the thing that everybody likes to talk about is him imprinting on a baby. A lot has been said about this. I don't need to add to that. It's weird. Yes, that Carlisle was part of the Volturi with Aro for seemingly no reason. A lot of Twilight fans have enjoyed speculating that Aro and Carlisle were lovers, and for me, that is canon and it is not speculation. I adore this as a concept. The reason being that the Volturi, or Aro specifically, likes to collect vampires that have unique abilities that he can use to gain more power and whatever. And it's been of note that Carlisle doesn't have a supernatural ability per se. I guess his supernatural ability would be having a lot of discipline and being able to resist human blood, but that doesn't seem like a gift that Aro would want to collect. So I'm kind of just shipping the idea of Aro and Carlisle. This is a small one that Rosalie and Jasper were actually trying to pass themselves off as twins. I feel like everyone forgets that. I know I did, especially because it, again, the twin thing, and it adds nothing to the story, so much so that they didn't even include it in the movies because it was just such a worthless thing to note. Bella and Edward never open mouth kiss. I guess they do in the they do in the movies, but within the books they never do. Stephenie, what a Mormon. We love to see. Yes, girl boss, yes. The reason for their lack of open mouth kissing within the books is because Stephenie says within her own vampire lore that vampires, the only fluids or liquids that they have within their body are venom, vampire venom. And Edward was so against possibly or even coming close to changing Bella into a vampire that he was fearful that if he ever open mouth kissed Bella, she could possibly have like a cut within her mouth, which would be a direct source to her bloodstream, meaning his venom would get in there and he would inadvertently turn her into a vampire, which was a no-go for him. And there's some implications about that in his pregnancy. I will leave you to make those conclusions for yourself, okay? If the only fluid he has is venom, connect the dots. I know you can. The two indigenous native men that we see with Jacob Black in the first movie, Twilight, are actually the original Sam and Embry. Moreover, Christopher Hyatt, the man in the middle here, was actually the original Jacob Black.
Embry? Do you know what happens to Embry?
I'm just here for the ride. I was really casted as Jacob, and I kind of just flipped into this role, and it's all working well for me. I'm just here having an experience.
We were this close to having an actual indigenous person play Jacob Black. And for those who are wondering, Taylor Lautner is a white man with a tan. So Renesmee, that is such a cursed name. I'm so sorry. Renesmee's birthday is on September 11th. Yes, this is actually canon and true to the lore, and true to the lore written by Stephenie Meyer. Renesmee's birthday is September 11th. Why of all days? It feels purposeful, but it has no significance, at least story-wise. So and with that, I believe is a good place to conclude and end this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and please consider subscribing and liking the video. Thank you and good night.